Some local TV news stations are responding to viewers' criticisms about their coverage of violence and crime. Last January, a station in Minneapolis decided to produce what it called a family-sensitive newscast. Editors were told to leave out shots of bodies, blood, and grief-stricken family members. Since then, about 24 stations have altered their coverage of crime. Is violence in the news distorting reality or simply reflecting it? Joining us to debate that question, Amitai Etzioni, professor of sociology at George Washington University, and David Bartlett, president of the Radio Television News Directors Association. They're both in our Washington bureau. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Professor, let me begin with you this morning. The complaints that you have about a newscast, well, how does that shape up for you?
Well, I think there are two sides to human nature. There is a darker side, and it should be reflected in the news, but there is also a nobler side, and that should not be lost sight of. I'll just give one quick example. The other day I was walking in one of those communities at 11 o'clock on Sunday, and the alarm went off, and I saw young people running to the fire station. It turns out that that community, as most communities do, still relies on voluntary firefighters, not professional ones. 90% of our firefighters are volunteers. I never heard about it on my news station, so I'd like to hear a balanced news. Tell us also about ennobling stories, not boring stories, but ennobling stories.
But are you saying that crime should not be reported, or the way it's reported? What's the problem that you see?
There are two things. One is the question of balance. I think the news should reflect the same balance as we find in reality. Second, there is a question of the time of the day, before or after 10 p.m. Children are around. We always take this into account as adults, as friends, as human beings. And family, yes, the way it's depicted. We have rather interesting tape of a toddler, a child about a year and a half old, watching one of those violent programs, and he has a teddy bear in his hand, and in the beginning he's kind of playful and joyful, and as the program becomes ever more gross, he ends up by tearing the head off the teddy bear. And there are other much more serious data to show that these pictures have consequences.
Mr. Bartlett, is it a legitimate point to need more balance, as Professor Etzioni says?
Well, balance is defined in lots of different ways by lots of different people. What concerns me is the stark reality that news is often disturbing. Responsible journalism sometimes, oftentimes, requires that the audience be disturbed. If all we did was cover the good news, or even if we concentrated significantly on the so-called good news, we wouldn't really be covering the news. Journalism, whether we like it or not, and whether it's disturbing or not, is not about planes that land safely and not about cats that don't get caught up in trees. It's about the aberrant, the unusual, the different. That is news. And I think to hide from that, particularly in an area as serious as crime, would be the height of irresponsibility for a journalist.
Do you think it's okay, Mr. Bartlett, though, to have a family-sensitive newscast if it's labeled as such, and then the rest of the newscasts done on a more way that the station may do it anyway? Is it okay to have a different one that may be more family-sensitive?
Editorial decisions made by responsible journalists to modulate the video they use to tell a story is perfectly okay with me. I think it's done very responsibly. It's what used to be called good journalism. I don't even think it needs a fancy new name. But if you lump under the title family-sensitive news a decision not to cover stories that might disturb the audience, that's a cop-out, and that's not even journalism.
Professor Etzioni, if a station decides not to cover crime in a family-sensitive newscast, what if they don't make somebody aware of a crime that could be affecting them in their neighborhood? You know, people who don't know about something are not necessarily, maybe if they're happier, but they're not maybe protected and served the best.
Well, we are not children. When crime occurs in our neighborhood, the word gets around. And again, there is a question of how you report it. But the main point is, we have different products in any other area. You can go to a shop and buy a different kind of car. You can buy a different kind of house. Why shouldn't I be entitled to choose the kind of news programs I see? As to this disturbing journalism, I find most newscasters these days turn into clowns. They think they are stand-up comedians. They've been told to be jovial, and just a moment ago I heard about one of the people saying, I'm frustrated. I don't care to know about his personal feelings. And so there are all kind of different products out there. Let's see if the public will not enjoy an occasionally uplifting story which can be as different and as interesting as one more shot of guts in the streets.
Okay, we're out of time, gentlemen. Thank you both so much for joining us this morning. Amitai Etzioni, professor at George Washington University, and David Bartlett, the president of the RTNDA. Thank you both.